When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, an inspection vehicle I had never seen was parked beside my contractor's truck. My front door stood open, and two strangers were moving through the hallway with tablets and cameras, photographing walls, measuring windows, and examining the unfinished room at the back of my house. For several seconds, I could only watch. They carried an official work order from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, authorizing them to inspect my property for an unapproved renovation. The address printed across the top was mine, but the document identified my home as an HOA-controlled lot. That made no sense. My property had existed before Willow Ridge was built, and it had never belonged to the association. Yet, someone had convinced these inspectors that they had permission to enter my house. At that moment, I still believed one phone call would expose a simple clerical mistake. I had no idea the mistake had been sitting in the HOA's records for decades. 3 weeks before I found those inspectors inside my house, the place still felt like the safest part of my life. It was a red brick ranch built in 1978, with white trim, a dark gray roof, and a gravel driveway that curved between two mature oak trees before reaching the detached garage. From the road, it looked modest compared with the newer homes surrounding it. To me, it was more valuable than anything the neighborhood board could have measured on paper. My parents had bought the property before Willow Ridge Estates existed. Back then, the land around it had been open fields, scattered trees, and a narrow county road that turned muddy every spring. I had spent most of my childhood there, helping my father repair fences, carrying tools for projects I barely understood, and watching my mother turn the rear yard into a place where our family gathered every summer. After they were gone, I kept the house. I could have sold it. Several real estate agents had suggested that the parcel might be worth more to a developer than it was as a private home. But selling it had never felt like a financial decision. The kitchen doorway still carried faint marks where my father had measured my height. The low stone wall along the eastern side had been rebuilt by hand after a storm. Even the oak closest to the garage had a scar from the tire swing we used as children. The house was not perfect. The plumbing needed patience. The garage door complained every winter, and one of the back rooms had suffered water damage after an old pipe failed. But every repair made the place feel more like mine without, erasing what it had been before. Willow Ridge had been built around the property nearly 10 years after my parents moved. The development eventually surrounded us on 3 sides with clean sidewalks, brick mailboxes, matching streetlights, and carefully trimmed lawns. Its main entrance stood less than half a mile away, marked by 2 stone columns and a sign bordered with seasonal flowers. There was a brick clubhouse near the center of the neighborhood, along with a small playground, a pond, and 82 homes arranged. Along winding private streets, anyone unfamiliar with the records would have assumed my house belonged to it. There was no gate between my driveway and Willow Ridge. We used the same private road for the final stretch leading toward the county highway. The neighborhood landscaping continued almost to my property line, and the newer houses had been designed to blend with the older rural character of the area. The legal boundary was less obvious than the visual one. A low stone wall crossed part of the eastern edge of my land before disappearing behind shrubs and trees. My father had always treated it as the practical division between our parcel and the development. It did not line up perfectly with the newer hedges, and one corner turned inward in a way that looked strange unless someone knew where the original property markers had been placed. I had never questioned it. My daily life was quiet. I worked as a facilities manager for a regional medical center, which meant most of my days were spent solving problems before anyone else noticed them. A failed air handling unit, a leaking roof, or an electrical issue rarely cared how stressed someone felt. The only useful response was to slow down, gather the facts, and deal with the problem in the correct order. That habit followed me home. I maintained the property myself whenever possible. I mowed around the stone wall, cleaned the gutters, repaired loose boards on the rear fence, and kept the gravel driveway level. I knew most of the nearby residents by name, even though I was not part of the association. Maggie Turner, who had lived in Willow Ridge since its earliest years, often walked past with her small dog in the mornings. Younger families used the road near my property on their way to the playground. People waved, borrowed tools, and occasionally asked whether the old house had been there before the subdivision. There had never been any serious conflict. My only formal connection to Willow Ridge was the road, because my driveway connected to the private section maintained by the association. I received one invoice each year through its management company. The description referred to road resurfacing, drainage maintenance, and storm cleanup. My father had paid the same charge for years, and I continued doing so after taking ownership. The amount was not listed as HOA dues. I had no membership card, no voting rights, no access code for the clubhouse, and no obligation to submit ordinary property improvements to an architectural committee. My closing documents did not identify the house as part of Willow Ridge. The arrangement had always seemed simple. I used part of the road, so I paid part of the cost. That spring, I decided to repair the water-damaged room at the back of the house. It had once been a small family room, but after the pipe failure, the flooring had been removed and part of the drywall had been opened. I planned to turn it into a combined office and guest space, mainly so I could work from home when the medical center required after-hours coordination. I applied for the county permit, hired Luis Mendoza, and gave his crew a temporary access code because my work schedule made it impossible to be home every day. Luis had worked on several houses in the area and had a reputation for being careful. He kept the site clean, sent photographs of each stage, and never made changes without checking first. The project was ordinary. That was why the first email from Willow Ridge surprised me. It came from Dana Reeves, the property manager who had recently taken over the association's account. She explained that Willow Ridge was updating its property records and had received a report suggesting that an interior renovation might be creating an unapproved rental unit. I assumed my address had been included by mistake. I sent a brief response explaining that the room was part of my existing house. The work had a county permit, and the property was not located within Willow Ridge. I included the permit number and expected the matter to disappear as quickly as it had appeared. A few days later, I met Cynthia Vale near the neighborhood entrance while she was supervising a community cleanup event. Cynthia had served as HOA president for several years. She was organized, formal, and always seemed to carry the same black leather clipboard. She did not approach me angrily. She mentioned that the association was reviewing old records and wanted to make sure the rules were being applied consistently throughout the community. Her manner was professional enough that I did not feel threatened. I repeated that my home was outside Willow Ridge. Cynthia acknowledged my explanation, but seemed more interested in the annual payments associated with the property. She believed those payments suggested that my parcel had some formal connection to the association, though she did not claim to have reviewed the original documents yet. I left the conversation believing the records would settle everything. Later that week, I noticed an unfamiliar vehicle slowing near my driveway. A woman in the passenger seat held up a phone while the driver stopped briefly beside the stone wall. By the time I walked toward the front yard, the vehicle was moving again. The following morning, 2 small marking flags appeared near the edge of the gravel driveway. They were not county utility flags, and neither Luis nor his crew had placed them. I removed nothing. Instead, I photographed their locations and checked the online permit portal. No new county inspection had been scheduled. That was the first moment the situation felt different. The next sign arrived in the mail. Willow Ridge sent a courtesy notice stating that the association needed additional information about the renovation and might require access to verify that the room complied with residential use restrictions. The letter referenced architectural standards I had never agreed to and a parcel number that looked almost like mine. Except for one digit, I responded again, this time attaching a copy of my deed and the first page of my closing statement. For several days, nothing happened. The renovation continued. Luis replaced the damaged framing. New insulation went into the exterior wall, and the room slowly began to look like part of the house again. I started to believe someone at the management office had finally recognized the error. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Luis sent me a message asking why the HOA had scheduled an interior compliance visit without coordinating it through him first. I had not scheduled any visit. Before I could reach him, a second message appeared. 2 inspectors had already arrived, and the property manager had assured him that I had been notified. I left work immediately. By the time I turned into my driveway, the inspection vehicle was parked beside Luis's truck. My front door was open, and strangers were already moving through the house. By the time I parked, Luis was standing near the front steps with the expression of someone who had realized too late that a routine decision had become a serious problem. The inspection vehicle was still running. A printed company logo covered the front doors, and 2 orange safety cones had been placed beside the driveway as though the visit had been scheduled and approved. Nothing about the scene looked secretive. That somehow made it worse. The people inside my house believed they belonged there. I entered through the open front door and found one inspector in the hallway photographing the walls with a tablet. The other was standing inside the unfinished rear room with a measuring device pointed toward the window frame. Dust sheets covered the floor, Luis's tools were stacked against one wall, and several sections of insulation were still exposed. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The lead inspector introduced himself as Martin Shaw and presented an identification badge from a private compliance company. He explained that Willow Ridge had authorized an inspection related to an unapproved interior conversion. I asked him to stop recording and leave the property. Martin did not become aggressive. He seemed confused more than anything else. He checked the address on his tablet, compared it with the number beside my front door, and then opened a work order carrying the Willow Ridge logo. My name appeared near the top. The address was correct. The parcel description was not. According to the work order, my house was identified as Willow Ridge Lot 83, even though the development contained only 82 residential lots. The document also referred to a section of the association's architectural rules allowing reasonable access when any owner refused to provide evidence of compliance. The wording looked official enough to convince almost anyone. It still had no authority inside my home. Told Martin that my property had never belonged to Willow Ridge and that I had not consented to an inspection. He immediately lowered the tablet and instructed the second inspector to stop taking measurements. Neither man argued with me. They collected their equipment. But before leaving, Martin allowed me to photograph the work order and the authorization page attached to it. The authorization had been issued by Dana. Reeves had stated that the homeowner had received notice and that access had been coordinated through the renovation. Contractor. That was the first fact I knew was false. Luis waited until the inspectors reached their vehicle before explaining what had happened. Dana's office had contacted him that morning and described the visit as a compliance check connected to the existing renovation. She had apparently told him that I had already received written notice and that the inspectors only needed a few minutes. Inside the unfinished room, Luis had assumed it was connected to the permit. The inspectors had shown identification. They knew my name. They had the correct address and details about the project. From his perspective, nothing about the request had looked unusual until I arrived. I understood why he had opened the door. That did not make me feel any better about strangers walking through the hallway with cameras. After they left, I photographed everything I could think of. The open access record on the door system, the tire marks near the driveway, the temporary cones, the rooms the inspectors had entered, the areas they had photographed. I saved Luis's messages and asked him to write down exactly what the management office had told him while the details were still fresh. I also contacted the local non-emergency number. I was not interested in creating a dramatic scene or demanding that anyone be arrested. I wanted a formal record showing that people had entered the house without my direct permission and that I had asked them to leave as soon as I discovered them. An officer arrived later that afternoon, reviewed the inspection paperwork, and documented the incident. He explained that the legal questions surrounding consent and property authority would likely depend on records he could not evaluate at the scene. His role was to record what had happened, not decide the dispute. That neutrality was useful. By evening, the house was quiet again, but it no longer felt the same. I checked every room, even though I knew the inspectors had probably remained near the renovation. I looked through drawers, cabinets, and the home office. Nothing appeared missing. The problem was not theft. It was the realization that an outside organization had treated the front door of my home as if it were another checkpoint in its enforcement process. The following morning, Cynthia called. Her explanation was controlled and procedural. She said the board had relied on its current property records and believed the visit had been properly authorized. She acknowledged that the communication with Luis may not have been clear, but she did not accept that the association lacked authority. According to Cynthia, the annual payments made by my family, the shared private road, and the property's location inside the neighborhood service area all supported Willow Ridge's position. I reminded her that paying for a road did not give the board the right to enter my house. She remained confident that the records would prove otherwise. That confidence unsettled me more than anger would have. Someone who was angry might eventually stop and reconsider. Cynthia believed the system supported her. In her mind, the inspection had not been an outrageous violation. It had been the predictable result of my refusal to cooperate with rules she assumed. Applied, I spent that weekend reviewing my closing documents. The folder had remained in a filing cabinet since I took ownership. Most of it contained the usual material: loan records, tax forms, title disclosures, insurance documents, and copies of the deed. There was no Willow Ridge membership agreement. There were no voting rights, monthly dues, or architectural requirements. One page listed exceptions, connected to the title. Among them was a reference to an older road maintenance agreement recorded years before I inherited the house. The document itself was not included. At the time of closing, I had barely noticed the reference. It seemed to explain the annual road invoice, and nothing in the title report suggested that the property was governed by an HOA. I wrote down the recording number. Before I could request the full document, another envelope arrived from Willow Ridge. This one was not described as a courtesy notice. It identified 3 alleged violations. The first involved refusing to complete an authorized inspection. The second claimed that I was converting part of the house into an unapproved rental unit. The third accused me of beginning architectural work without submitting plans to the association. A hearing date had been scheduled for the following month. The notice gave me 10 business days to provide access, submit construction documents, and bring the project into compliance. It also warned that continued refusal could result in fines and administrative charges. The board had taken an unauthorized entry and turned it into evidence that I was uncooperative. I responded by certified mail. I included my deed, the county permit, the title summary, and a written request for the exact recorded declaration that supposedly placed my parcel under Willow Ridge authority. I also requested copies of every photograph taken inside the house, the inspection company's complete work order, and any communication claiming I had consented to entry. I kept the tone factual. I did not accuse Cynthia of intentionally sending strangers into my home. I did not threaten a lawsuit. I asked the board to verify its authority before taking another step. For several days, I received no answer. The silence did not stop the neighborhood from reacting. Maggie Turner visited one afternoon after hearing that Willow Ridge had inspected my renovation. She had lived in the development since its earliest years and was certain my parents had never joined the association. She remembered disagreements during construction, though the details had faded with time. Other neighbors saw the situation differently. A few believed I was trying to enjoy the benefits of Willow Ridge while avoiding its rules. They knew I used the private road. They knew my father had sent payments to the association. From the outside, the board's position looked reasonable. The facts were no longer enough on their own. The story spreading through the neighborhood was that I had built an illegal rental space and blocked a legitimate inspection. Then, the board sent its response. It did not include a recorded covenant, placing my property inside Willow Ridge. Instead, it included a printed map from the management company's software. The map showed my parcel shaded in the same color as every HOA lot around it. Attached to the map was a ledger containing years of payments from my father. Cynthia treated those two records as proof that the property had always belonged to the association. At first glance, they almost looked convincing. But the map contained no recording number, no survey certification, and no county stamp. It was not a legal plat. It was a digital service map, created by the same management company that had authorized the inspection. The payment ledger created a different problem. It confirmed that my family had been sending money to Willow Ridge for decades. What it did not explain was what those payments legally meant. 2 days later, the board issued a $750 fine for refusing the inspection and confirmed that the hearing would proceed. That was when I understood. The dispute had changed. Willow Ridge was no longer investigating whether my home belonged to the HOA. It had already accepted its own records as the answer. To stop them, I would have to find the document those records had misunderstood. I started with the most obvious document, the deed. It identified the house as a separate tract and described the property through measurements that did not match Willow Ridge's numbered lots. The subdivision declaration in my closing file covered the homes around mine, but its legal description stopped before reaching my parcel. That should have ended the dispute. Instead, the board treated it as incomplete. Cynthia's written response argued that the deed did not address later agreements, shared services, or the possibility that my parents had accepted association membership after the subdivision was built. She pointed again to the payment ledger and requested that I attend the hearing with any evidence I intended to rely on. The language remained professional. The message underneath it did not. Willow Ridge believed I carried the burden of proving that it lacked authority over my home. Sent one more certified response. This time, I included a copy of the county permit, the relevant pages from the title report, and the legal description attached to my deed. I requested the recorded annexation document, amendment, covenant, or signed membership agreement that supposedly transferred authority to the association. I also asked the board to suspend enforcement until it located that record. 3 days later, Dana informed me that the hearing had been postponed while the association reviewed its files. For the first time since the inspection, the pressure eased. The fine remained on the account, but no new amount was added. The inspection company stopped contacting Louise. Cynthia did not send another notice. Even the conversations around the neighborhood seemed to quiet down. I began to think someone had finally opened the right folder. That feeling lasted less than a week. Dana found a set of old financial ledgers in the clubhouse storage room. They showed annual payments from my father dating back to the early years of Willow Ridge. Some entries were handwritten. Later ones had been transferred into accounting software and listed beside regular homeowner assessments. The descriptions were inconsistent. Several early entries referred to road maintenance. Others simply showed the amount and the Bennett name. By the time the records became digital, the distinction between shared road contributions and association dues had disappeared. Cynthia treated the discovery as confirmation. The hearing was reinstated. The board added administrative costs and warned that unpaid charges could eventually be referred for collection review. The letter stopped short of threatening an immediate lien, but the direction was clear. Willow Ridge intended to continue, escalating unless I accepted its authority. The temporary pause had not been a resolution. It had given the board time to strengthen the wrong. Conclusion: that was when I contacted Rachel Kim. Rachel was a real estate attorney whose office handled title disputes, easements, and association records. I brought her everything: the deed, the closing file, the annual invoices, the management company map, the violation notices, the inspector's work order, and the photograph of the parcel number that was almost, but not exactly, mine. Reviewed the documents without making promises. The first thing she noticed was that Willow Ridge's declaration described only 82 residential lots. The work order had identified my property as Lot 83, a designation that did not appear anywhere in the recorded plat. The second issue was the payment history. Rachel explained that regular payments could support several different interpretations. They might represent dues, contractual service fees, private road contributions, or obligations created through an easement. The ledger alone could not establish which one applied. The controlling answer would be found in the recorded documents. She ordered a complete title search, including amendments, plats, easements, road agreements, and any document filed against my parcel after Willow Ridge was created. The first results supported my position. No recorded HOA declaration clearly included the house. No amendment added the property. No membership agreement appeared in the chain of title. But the original subdivision declaration contained a reference to an attached exhibit that was missing from the online copy. That missing exhibit became the next problem. Rachel could not assume it supported me. It might have expanded the legal description, identified additional parcels, or created some kind of special membership. Until we saw it, the board could continue arguing that the digital record was incomplete. While Rachel worked through the county archives, I focused on the inspection. Martin's company responded to my records request more carefully than Willow Ridge had. The entry log showed that Dana's office had issued the work order and identified Luis as the access contact. No note indicated that anyone from the inspection company had spoken with me. No signature, email, or recorded call showed that I had personally agreed to the visit. The file also confirmed that 12 photographs had been taken inside the house. They included the rear room, the hallway, the electrical panel, 2 windows, and part of the kitchen entrance. The images had been uploaded to a compliance portal shared with the management company. Until then, I had been thinking mainly about the people who entered. Now I understood that the images could remain long after they were gone. I sent a written demand asking the company and Willow Ridge to preserve the records but restrict access to the photographs until the dispute was resolved. Rachel advised me not to demand immediate deletion yet because the images were evidence of what had occurred. That was difficult to accept. The most private part of the incident had become something I needed to preserve in order to prove it happened. Luis completed a written statement as well. He described the call from Dana's office, the assurance that I had been notified, and the way the inspection was presented as part of a routine compliance process connected to the renovation. He had not given independent permission to inspect my house. He had relied on the claim that I already had. That closed one possible escape. For the board, they could no longer argue that I had knowingly approved the visit through my contractor, but it did not answer the larger question of why Willow Ridge believed it had the right to issue the order in the first place. The answer began with Maggie Turner. She stopped by one evening carrying an envelope filled with old neighborhood newsletters and photographs. Most of the material was ordinary: clubhouse announcements, landscaping updates, roadwork schedules, and pictures from community events. One photograph showed the Willow Ridge entrance while it was still under construction. My parents' house stood in the distance, separated from the development by open ground and the same low stone wall that remained on the property. Maggie remembered that the developer had wanted my parents to join the new association. My father had refused because the house already existed and because he did not want the board controlling improvements to land his family had owned before the subdivision. They still needed access to the new private road. According to Maggie, the compromise had been a separate agreement. My parents would contribute to road. maintenance but remain outside the association. She could not remember the document's name. She did remember that it had been discussed at one of the first neighborhood meetings. That changed the direction of the investigation. Till then, I had been searching for proof that my property was excluded from Willow Ridge. Maggie suggested something stronger might exist, a recorded agreement explaining both the exclusion and the annual payments. Rachel searched the county, index using my parents' names rather than the subdivision name. That was how she found the reference. The document was titled Road Maintenance and Non-Annexation Agreement. It had been recorded shortly after the subdivision plat. The online archive showed only the first page. The remaining pages were available on microfilm and required a certified retrieval from the county records office. The title alone explained why the association's software had been wronged. Maintenance had been converted into membership. But until we had the full agreement, we still did not know exactly what rights the document created or what authority it denied. Rachel ordered a certified copy. The county estimated several business days. Cynthia did not wait. She scheduled a final enforcement meeting and authorized the association's attorney to review the account for possible collection action. The notice stated that the board would consider the payment history, the inspection refusal, and my failure to submit renovation plans. By then, Cynthia seemed more certain than she had been at the beginning. She had decades of payments, a management map, and a homeowner who had refused an official inspection. From her perspective, every new fact confirmed the same story. The BDDY meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. The certified county envelope arrived Thursday morning. Placed it unopened on Rachel's conference table, whatever was inside would determine whether Willow Ridge had made an administrative mistake or whether it had entered a house it had never possessed the authority to inspect. Rachel opened the certified envelope carefully and placed the pages in order across her conference table. The first page looked almost identical to the partial image we had already found online. It identified my parents, the developer of Willow Ridge, and the private road serving both properties. Nothing on that page settled the dispute. It only confirmed that an agreement had existed. The second page described maintenance responsibilities. My parents had agreed to pay a proportional share of resurfacing, drainage repairs, storm cleanup, and other costs connected to the section of road they used. The payments were not optional, and Willow Ridge had been permitted to collect them on behalf of the participating properties. That explained the invoices. It also explained how the mistake had survived for so long. From an accounting perspective, money had moved from the Bennett property to the association every year. Once the original descriptions disappeared from the ledgers, those payments began to resemble ordinary assessments. A future property manager looking only at the numbers could easily assume that the house belonged to Willow Ridge. But the agreement did not stop with the road. The next section contained the legal description of my property. Rachel compared it with my deed, the subdivision plat, and the stone boundary line visible in Maggie's old photograph. They matched. The Bennett property was identified as a separate tract lying outside the recorded boundaries of Willow Ridge Estates. The development had been built around it, but the land had never been absorbed into the subdivision. That should have been enough. It was not the strongest part. Several paragraphs later, the agreement addressed the exact misunderstanding the board had built its case around. It stated that payments made for shared road and utility expenses would not create association membership, voting rights, architectural authority, covenant enforcement, or inspection rights over the Bennett property. The language was unusually specific. It did not merely say my parents had remained independent. It listed the powers Willow Ridge would not receive in exchange for collecting road payments. One of those powers was the right to regulate alterations to the house. Another was the right to enter or inspect the property. Rachel turned to the final pages. The agreement allowed my parents or any future owner to join Willow Ridge voluntarily, but membership required a separate written annexation instrument. That document had to be signed by the property owner, accepted by the association, and recorded with the county. Rachel had already searched the complete chain of title. No annexation had ever been recorded. For decades, Willow Ridge had collected road contributions under an agreement that specifically prevented those contributions from becoming evidence of HOA membership. Cynthia had relied on the payment ledger as her strongest proof. The original document gave those payments the opposite meaning. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. The agreement did not change what had happened inside my house. It only confirmed that every warning I had given the board had been accurate. The deed, the permit, the missing lot number, the unusual parcel description, and Maggie's memory had all pointed in the same direction. The answer had been sitting in the county records since the subdivision was created. Rachel prepared a short evidence package for the meeting. She included only the documents necessary to establish the sequence clearly: my deed and legal description, the recorded Willow Ridge subdivision plat, the inspection company's entry log Luis's written statement, the certified road maintenance and non-annexation agreement, the title search confirming that no annexation existed before we left her office. She sent a preservation notice to Willow Ridge, its management company, and the inspection company. It required them to retain the work order. Emails, access records, photographs, portal activity, and internal communications connected to my property. She also demanded that enforcement stop until the board reviewed the certified agreement. The meeting remained scheduled. By the time I arrived at the clubhouse that evening, nearly every chair had been filled. The dispute had spread far enough through the neighborhood that residents wanted to see whether I had built an illegal rental space or whether the board had made a mistake. Cynthia sat at the center of the front table with her black leather clipboard beside her. Dana had a laptop open in front of her. The treasurer, secretary, and 2 additional board members sat along the same row. An attorney representing the association had joined them. That was the first sign that the tone had changed. Cynthia opened the meeting by summarizing the board's position. Her presentation was controlled and professional. She relied on the same facts she had used throughout the dispute: my family's long payment history, the shared private road, the management company map, and my refusal to complete the interior inspection. Described the board's actions as an effort to apply rules consistently. Nothing about her presentation sounded irrational. That was what made the situation so dangerous. If someone had seen only the document Cynthia selected, the association's position might have appeared reasonable. My property sat inside the neighborhood. My family had paid the association for decades. Construction was underway. Inspectors had been denied access after arriving with an official work order. The problem was not that her facts were invented. The problem was that their meaning had never been verified. Dana displayed the management map first. My parcel appeared in the same shaded service area as every Willow Ridge home. Rachel asked whether the map had been recorded with the county, certified by a surveyor, or attached to the original declaration. It had not. The image had been created from the management company's operational database. It showed properties receiving services, not properties governed by recorded covenants. The first piece of the board's case weakened. Next came the payment ledger. Dana showed entries from my father extending back to the development's earliest years. The later records had been categorized as assessments, while the earliest handwritten entries contained shorter descriptions. Rachel enlarged one of the original lines. Beside the Bennett name, the notation referred to road maintenance. The room became quieter. The payments were real, but the board still had no document explaining why they existed. Cynthia argued that the long history demonstrated acceptance of association authority. Rachel did not challenge that conclusion immediately. She moved to the plat, the Official recorded map showed 82 residential lots. Each one had a number, dimensions, and a clear location inside Willow Ridge. My house was visible as an adjoining tract, but it had no Willow Ridge lot number. There was no Lot 83. The designation used on Martin's work order had been created inside the management system. It had never existed in the recorded subdivision. One board member leaned toward Dana's laptop and began comparing the digital map with the certified plat. The two images looked similar at first, but they served completely different purposes. The software showed who received services. The plat showed who legally belonged to the subdivision. Then, Rachel presented Martin's entry record. It confirmed that the inspection company had received authorization from Dana's office. It showed no direct communication with me, no signed consent, and no record that I had approved access through Luis. Luis's statement explained why he opened the door. He had been told I had already been notified and that the visit was connected to the renovation. The board could no longer argue that I had voluntarily permitted the inspection. Their only remaining defense depended on proving that Willow Ridge possessed independent authority over the property. That was when Rachel placed the certified agreement on the table. She began with the road provisions. The document confirmed that my parents had agreed to contribute to maintenance expenses. Cynthia appeared briefly relieved. That section seemed to support the ledger. Then Rachel continued. She showed the paragraph identifying the Bennett land as a separate, non-subdivision tract. The legal description matched my deed. The boundary matched the old plat. The road agreement had not absorbed the property into Willow Ridge. It had preserved its separation. The next paragraph changed the meeting. Rachel directed the board to the section stating that payment of shared expenses did not create membership or grant the association covenant, architectural, or inspection authority. Nobody interrupted. Cynthia looked down at the certified pages, then toward the ledger she had relied upon throughout the dispute. For the first time, both documents were being read together. The payments did not prove membership. They existed because the property was not a member. Rachel presented the annexation requirement. Last, if the Bennett property had ever joined Willow Ridge, a separate document would have been recorded in the chain of title. The complete search showed no such filing. The association's attorney reviewed the paragraph, checked the recording information, and asked Dana whether the management company had located any annexation document in its files. She had not. The attorney then examined the declaration, the plat, and the certified agreement in sequence. His conclusion was measured, but its effect was immediate. Willow Ridge had no recorded jurisdiction over my property. The violation notices could not stand. The architectural rules did not apply. The fine had no valid basis. The association had possessed no authority to order an interior inspection, and the work order had falsely represented both jurisdiction and homeowner consent. The board was advised to stop enforcement, withdraw all charges, preserve the evidence, restrict access to the interior photographs, correct the property database, and notify its liability insurer. No one celebrated. The room simply became still. Cynthia did not transform into a different person. She did not shout or blame everyone around her. She reviewed the agreement again, focusing on the language about road payments and non-membership. Her certainty had depended on incomplete records. Now, the complete record left nothing to interpret. The same payments she had used to justify the inspection were connected to a document specifically denying the HOA the right to conduct one. The power in the room had shifted, but it did not shift because I had argued more forcefully. It shifted because the board's map was not a plat, its ledger was not a membership agreement, its inspection order was not consent, and the one recorded document controlling the relationship said exactly what Willow Ridge had never bothered to check. By the end of the meeting, the board suspended every action against my property. The fine was frozen. The collection review was canceled. Dana was instructed to lock the inspection photographs inside the portal until deletion and preservation requirements could be resolved. The association's attorney requested copies of the full evidence package for its insurer. I walked out of the clubhouse, carrying the same certified agreement my parents had signed decades earlier. It had not given me a new right. It had proved that the right to control my home had never belonged to Willow Ridge in the first place. The suspension issued that night became permanent 3 days later. Willow Ridge sent me a formal notice withdrawing every violation connected to the renovation. The $750 fine disappeared, along with the administrative charges and the warning about collection review. The letter also confirmed that my property was not governed by the association's declaration, architectural standards, inspection procedures, or enforcement rules. For the first time since I had found strangers inside my house, the board's records matched the county's. That should have felt like the end. It did not. The notices were gone, but 12 photographs taken inside my home still existed in a compliance portal. The inspection company had already restricted access to them, yet copies had been visible to Dana and possibly other authorized users inside the management system. Neither Rachel nor I knew whether anyone had downloaded them before the account was locked. The photographs were not especially dramatic. They showed unfinished walls, windows, electrical panels, part of the hallway, and a corner of the kitchen entrance. But their ordinary nature did not make them less personal. They had been created by people who entered my home under authority the HOA never possessed. Rachel required Willow Ridge, its management company, and the inspection company to provide a written record of where the images had been stored and who had accessed them. The portal log showed that Dana had reviewed the upload after the inspection. Cynthia had received a compliance summary but had not opened the full image folder. No outside sharing or downloads appeared in the activity history. Once the evidence preservation requirement had been satisfied, the photographs were deleted. The inspection company removed the originals from its devices and internal account. The management company cleared the shared folder and confirmed that its backup retention cycle had been shortened for those files. Several weeks later, I received written certification that no accessible copies remained. It was only a technical document, but it gave me more relief than the letter withdrawing the fine. The association also notified its liability insurer. That step changed the tone of everything that followed. Until then, the dispute had been handled by people trying to prove which set of records was correct. Once the insurer became involved, the focus shifted toward how the mistake happened, what damage it caused, and how to prevent it from happening again. No one proposed an enormous courtroom award. Rachel did not promise that the association would collapse or that every board member would be removed. The actual losses were specific and measurable. I had paid for legal review, title research, certified records, additional security, and construction delays. Luis had lost work hours responding to document requests. I had also lived for weeks knowing that an organization, with no authority over my property, had entered my house and stored images from inside it. The insurer arranged mediation. The final agreement covered my legal expenses, the cost of changing the locks and access system, the delay to the renovation, and a reasonable payment connected to the unauthorized entry and handling of the photographs. Willow Ridge did not admit intentional wrongdoing. It acknowledged that the inspection had been ordered without verified jurisdiction or direct owner consent. That distinction mattered to me. I had never believed Cynthia had planned to invade my privacy. I believed she had relied on incomplete records, ignored repeated warnings, and allowed her confidence in the association's system to replace basic verification. The result had still been serious. Intent did not erase consequence. As part of the settlement, Willow Ridge hired an independent firm to audit its property and service records. The review began with my parcel but quickly expanded to every address appearing in the management system. The auditors discovered exactly where the error had formed. Years earlier, Willow Ridge had maintained separate paper lists. One identified properties legally governed by the association. Another identified parcels contributing to shared roads, drainage work, or utility expenses. When Dana's company transferred the records into its software, both lists had been connected to one master property map. The system displayed every paying parcel in the same service area. Because my family's annual road contributions had later been categorized beside regular assessments, the software treated my property as though it were another member lot. The false designation of Lot 83 had been created to make the address fit the system. It was not found in any deed, plat, declaration, or recorded agreement. It existed only because the software required a lot number. Once that number appeared on screens, invoices, and inspection forms, people stopped asking where it had come from. The audit also identified several non-residential parcels that had been classified incorrectly. A utility tract, a drainage area, and a narrow strip used for road access appeared in the database as though they were governed member properties. None had received violation notices because no one lived on them, but their presence showed that my situation had not resulted. From one mistyped address, the system had confused financial participation with legal membership. Dana was removed from the Willow Ridge account while her company completed additional training and corrected the database. She did not lose her profession, and no one claimed she had deliberately fabricated my consent. The review found that she had relied on the inaccurate property, classification, and used standard language in the inspection. Work order without confirming that I had approved. Access. That decision remained her. Responsibility. The same was true for Cynthia. She had not created the software mistake, but she had authorized enforcement after I provided documents questioning the HOA's jurisdiction. She had been shown my deed, county permit, and title information. Instead of pausing until the association found recorded proof, she had treated the payment ledger as enough. Her mistake was not believing the first record she saw. It was continuing after the records began contradicting one another. The board adopted a new verification process before any future enforcement could begin. Every parcel had to be matched to a recorded declaration, amendment, or annexation instrument. A software label, billing history, or service map could no longer be used as proof of HOA authority. Interior inspections received even stricter rules. No inspector could enter a home through a contractor, tenant, relative, or worker unless the owner had provided separate written consent. Work orders had to identify the exact legal basis for the inspection. Photographs could be taken only within the approved area, and the storage period had to be disclosed in advance. The board also required 2 people to review any enforcement action involving uncertain property boundaries or older agreements. Those procedures were not dramatic. They were the kind of changes that should have existed before anyone entered my house. Cynthia remained president, long enough to complete the corrective process. At the next community meeting, she presented the audit findings and accepted that the board had acted without sufficient verification. Her apology was formal and carefully worded, which matched the way she handled almost everything. Ndidi Maki did not suddenly become warm or self-deprecating. She acknowledged that the board had allowed an administrative record to carry more weight than recorded property documents, and that my repeated objections should have triggered a complete review before enforcement continued. Several months later, Cynthia announced that she would not seek another term. Some residents believed she had been treated too harshly because she had tried to enforce what she thought were neighborhood rules. Others believed stepping away was the only appropriate consequence after authorizing an inspection inside a non-member's house. Understood both reactions. Cynthia had spent years believing consistency protected the community. The problem was that she had mistaken consistency for correctness. Applying the same procedure to every address meant nothing if the procedure began with the wrong assumption. Neighborhood's reaction remained divided for a while. He's visited after the settlement and brought another old photograph she had found. It showed my father standing near the stone wall during the subdivision's construction. Behind him, survey stakes marked the same boundary, confirmed in the non-annexation agreement. She had remembered the arrangement correctly. A few residents apologized for assuming I was trying to avoid rules, while benefiting from Willow Ridge. Others never apologized directly but became friendlier once the documents were made public. A smaller group continued to believe that anyone using the private road should voluntarily follow the association's appearance standards, even without a legal obligation. I did not try to change their minds. The road agreement required me to pay my share of maintenance. I continued doing that. The difference was that future invoices clearly identified the charge as a shared road contribution rather than an HOA assessment. The association created a separate account category for non-member service parcels. My property was labeled non-HOA parcel, road maintenance agreement only. That line appeared on every invoice and internal property screen. It was simple, but it prevented the next property manager from making the same assumption. Luis finished the renovation several weeks later than planned. We repaired the places where inspection measurements had disturbed the temporary coverings, completed the drywall, and installed new flooring. The rear room became what it had always been intended to become: an office with a small guest area, not a rental unit and not an architectural threat to the neighborhood. I replaced the old temporary access system with one that generated separate codes for every contractor. Each code expired automatically. No future visitor could enter based on someone else's claim that I had approved it. For the first few weeks, I checked the door history more often than necessary. Every unfamiliar vehicle near the driveway caught my attention. Whenever Luis or another worker arrived, I verified the appointment even when I already knew who it was. The house had not physically changed much because of the inspection. My relationship with it had. Before the incident, I had treated the front door as a boundary everyone understood. Afterward, I knew that official-looking paperwork could make reasonable people cross that boundary without ever asking whether the authority behind it was real. That feeling faded slowly. Once the room was completed, I returned the family photographs to the hallway. I replaced the old kitchen light, repaired a section of the stone wall, and cleared the shrubs around the boundary marker that appeared in Maggie's photograph. The marker had probably been there throughout the entire dispute. Like the recorded agreement, it had not suddenly become important. People had simply stopped looking at it. The annual Willow Ridge meeting the following year was quieter. The treasurer, Glenn Foster, had taken responsibility for the record correction project. He had supported Cynthia through most of the dispute, mainly because he was concerned about unpaid assessments and the financial consequences of inconsistent enforcement. Once the certified agreement appeared, his priorities changed. He understood that enforcing rules against the wrong parcel created far more liability than leaving one questionable renovation alone. Under his supervision, Willow Ridge reviewed every old easement, service agreement, and annexation record connected to the neighborhood. The association did not collapse. Property values did not disappear. Residents still received landscaping notices, paid assessments, argued about budgets, and attended meetings in the same brick clubhouse. The change was less visible but more important. The board became slower when records were unclear. People began asking where authority came from before deciding how to use it. Looking back, I never saw the outcome as a victory over Willow Ridge. The house did not need the board to lose. It needed the board to recognize the limits of its authority. The agreement my parents had signed decades earlier had already drawn that line. It allowed the neighborhood and our property to share a road without sharing control. The arrangement worked for years because everyone understood the difference. Once that understanding disappeared, a maintenance payment became an assessment, a service map became a legal boundary, a contractor's cooperation became homeowner consent, and an ordinary renovation became justification for entering a private house. None of those changes happened all at once. They happened through small assumptions that nobody stopped to verify. The most disturbing part was not that Willow Ridge had one inaccurate file. It was how many people trusted that file simply because it looked official. The inspectors trusted the work order. Luis trusted the management office. Dana trusted the software. Cynthia trusted the ledger. The board trusted the map. Every person relied on the step before them, and by the time I reached my front door, the original mistake had become an inspection vehicle, 2 cameras, and strangers standing in my hallway. The certified agreement did not give me some hidden advantage. It restored a boundary that had existed all along. The building could be repaired. The database could be corrected. The fines could be removed, and the photographs could be deleted. Trust took longer. Even now, I sometimes think about how differently the situation would have ended if I had accepted the first notice, submitted the renovation plans, or assumed that an official-looking work order had to be valid. A home is private not because every organization agrees to respect it, but because the people inside it understand where authority ends. And after what happened to mine, I could not help wondering how many homeowners would know what to do if they came home and found strangers inside, carrying paperwork from an HOA they had never belonged to.